appeals. And this is the final layer of the sandwich before we get oral arguments, which are taking place about 1 week today. We'll be covering it, of course. Thank you for subscribing to join us on that. But now this is Trump's final word before those oral arguments. It's 41 pages. We're going to hit the highlights. Case is United States of America versus Donald Trump on appeal. This is the reply brief from Trump out of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals on appeal from Chutkan's courtroom. Oral arguments scheduled. Mark those calendars for January 9th. And then this will be something that is going to be appealed going up to the Supreme Court. So we're making a record. This will be a historic case. We know who the parties are. We've been covering this case for a while. We already know that what the table of contents includes, a bunch of brilliance from Trump's defense, and so on. And as we fast forward through all of this, we get right into the summary of the argument from Trump's defense. They say, "Dear Court of Appeals, President Trump has immunity from prosecution for his official acts." We're always comparing and contrasting these framings because Jack Smith says Donald Trump is arguing about absolute immunity, so that he can just do whatever he wants, and it's kind of a free-for-all, which was never Trump's argument. It's always much more circumscribed. They say, under our system of separation of powers, the executive president's official acts can, quote, never be examinable by the courts. That came back from a seminal case in American jurisprudence called Marbury versus Madison. Arguably the most important case in American law. 1803. Because if this happened, if this case were decided that the courts can say that a president's act is examinable, then doesn't that make the court really the president? So it established this real interesting line that, oftentimes I think a lot of self-interested men at the time would not do. They want to give themselves more power, and that didn't happen here. So it's a very seminal case. That's why it's so important. Now we don't have any of that. Now we just have one political person prosecuting his enemy. So they say the judicial branch cannot issue equitable relief directly against the president's official act. So the court can't order something against the president, including his power under the Take Care Clause. In other words, the president has an obligation to his duties. So also, it cannot sit in criminal judgment over them. So it's an extension of Marbury versus Madison. If the court can't examine the executive, then how can the court, through criminal law, now suddenly examine them? Because they just decided that president's conduct was criminal. Because Jack Smith and Joe Biden ordered Merrick Garland to go get this done. So that they say the Constitution's text and history and policy support this conclusion. The impeachment judgment clause presupposes the existence of presidential criminal immunity. It's obvious. Early commentators, including Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, Chief Justice Marshall, Justice Story, ever heard of them? They support it. And they're supported by the 234-year unbroken tradition of not prosecuting presidents for official acts, despite vociferous calls to do so from across the political spectrum. Also provides powerful evidence of this. In the last 234 years, we didn't have anybody demented enough to do this, because it wrecks everything. Now, analogous immunity doctrines, also rooted in the separation of powers, demonstrate the basis and the existence of criminal immunity for presidents. The likelihood of mushrooming politically motivated prosecutions, you mean like 4 of them? Yeah, probably like the ones we have like right now. Yeah. And future cycles of recrimination are far more menacing and crippling to the presidency than the threat of civil liability. And remember, we've already talked about this Nixon case. We've already established in the Supreme Court that there is presidential immunity for civil liability. So they're saying if that's obviously something that's necessary to protect against that, this is obviously the next extension.
Hey, Dirty.
Therefore, the scope of criminal immunity has to be at least.
Oh, it's getting better. Started off pretty bad.
Immunity. For example, in other words, the
almost
outer
quit.
perimeter of
almost quit my job.
Official responsibility.
But we're good now.
All the way to the.
I'm gonna go have some dinner.
Capture it all in there. All
I was
five.
way too busy to even contemplate streaming from the desktop there, so I'll probably stream from Electro Prime when I get there later.
All falls within the scope of the perimeter. Saying the impeachment judgment clause
Around
and principles of
8:30ish.
double jeopardy, they both independently on their own.
Yeah, I actually called my boss and
the plain text of the clause.
She brought me down. I was so pissed at it's something that one of the clients said.
Of the historical evidence, they all confirm that a president who was
the
and acquitted
regional vice president for the company that I hire for during the day here, Spectrum Foods, is a real dick.
Court of Appeals. Now the government came to you with their so-called statement of the case.
The most unprofessional person I've ever met in business.
The government statement of facts is both legally
and he's not afraid to hide it either. He'll put it in emails with everybody copied to. Just say some nasty ass shit. And I'm not one to just take that shit.
Now the government attempts to emphasize the allegedly unlawful.
He's not even my boss.
Purpose of the acts
in the
indictment. However, assessing whether immunity applies, that's not what the courts do.
He's a fucking Canadian too, so that should tell you everything.
So Jack Smith is a different test.
Nobody should have to. I don't treat people like that unless they come off fucked up, you know? You see how respectful I am with people until they step the wrong way.
But even worse, the government relies on facts that are even outside of the indictment. Okay, the four corners of the documents, they all allege criminal conduct. That's what we charge on. If you want to say somebody's guilty of something.
Yeah, I used to do that when I was younger, but I'm old enough now to where I realize the consequences of making those types of rash decisions.
And so we can ask the jury to issue an opinion on that.
Been with this company for 13 years now.
So when you start bringing in a bunch of other stuff, you say like this
12 years
caused an insurrection. But you know, he also leaves the seat open home too. Also, he does that too. And there was this one time when he didn't hold the door open for something. And he's kind of a jerk because he's, you know, whatever. Like all of these other things, all irrelevant. It's all meaningless. Get out of here. You don't get to say all that stuff. Like, what can you prove? This is a court of law, not the view. All right. Even worse, they say they're using a bunch of stuff outside of the four corners to wrongfully suggest that Trump is responsible.
Well, in this day and age, it is with any company.
And in charge of those things. I say this is. The indictment does not charge President Trump with responsibility for the events at the Capitol. Like, so that's like a fun statement, right? They're not even blaming him for the riots.
Thing is, I think the detox company, I think, is getting ready to give me a job offer to do IT and HR. So we'll see how that goes.
And so no evidence supports those allegations. Now, the government's account selectively omits key facts in their little narrative, such as this one. For example, in his speech at the Ellipse, President Trump encouraged the crowd to, quote, peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. They left that one out. He also said, we want you to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen. And they left that one out. But I think that's coded language. That actually means execute Order 66. So President Trump denounced the destruction of the monuments and other symbols of American democracy. He never encouraged anyone to enter the Capitol. He said on social media that the protesters should remain peaceful and to, quote, stay peaceful. He released a
it's going to take, I already told him how much it's going to be, and it ain't cheap.
Omits the
bring me on full time for that, to do both those tasks.
The date back to November 2020 and continue to this day in our nation's political discourse. And more of the country is agreeing with us. It's trending our direction because people are asking themselves about this. Wait a minute. They said that the Russians were responsible for that Hunter laptop. I thought Putin was responsible for that. And now Hunter Biden is taking Dookie right on the steps of Congress in front of James Comer saying, I'm innocent of everything. Wait a minute, what?
Yeah, it would be more Pittsburgh trips.
So is there something there or is there not there? Right? We're asking
not just for IT stuff, but for HR stuff as well.
And then people are realizing it. Okay, the facade is.
But they got to pay me enough to cover what I'm making here. I mean, I've been here 12 years. I'm making decent money here. I can't just walk away.
So they're based on extensive information of widespread fraud and irregularities, yeah, like the CIA and like the FBI, Elvis Chan submitting reports to have channels censored.
Oh.
So they say, look, Trump, he said all of that, and all of that got ignored because Jackson doesn't care. Now they say President Trump, by the way, has immunity from prosecution for his official acts. This is in reply to the Court of Appeals. They say Article 2, Section 1.
Yeah, the person that they got doing HR now has never done it before. I mean, she's kind of got it figured out, but she's also dating one of the directors, and he's breaking up with her. So everyone thinks she's going to quit. And even if she doesn't quit, she's probably not going to be doing that same job for very long, much longer. So
it says that these are not classified documents. That doesn't override the president's power under the Constitution. It's delegated. Otherwise, if they could.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's like I said, that's one of the reasons why I can't just quit this job, man. It's not the greatest money, but it's nothing to sneeze at, you know. It definitely pays the bills.
Same thing here. A president's official acts can never be examined by the court. They will list Cheney's crime from the podium.
So this place gave me a job back when nobody would. When I first got out of trouble. So
the government, they say, this is Jackson, that they've already been the shadow of this historical precedent. They say, Marbury, seminal case, they say, it addressed the reviewability of acts of executive officers in general, but not the president in particular. So the president is excluded from that case. Now, Marbury distinguished an executive officer's ministerial duties from the president's official acts. So they say, by the Constitution of the United States, the president is invested with certain important political powers, from Marbury, in the exercise of which he is to use his own discretion and is accountable only to his country in his political character. And this is the point that the left fails to get. If the country really thinks that Donald
don't even have his lights on.
Just vote against him. Maybe they will. They're all going to go to the polls. Probably going to be him versus Biden. Maybe, I don't know. And when we get there, people can vote. And so if Liz Cheney
just came out,
Kinzinger,
unless that's his breaks,
then Trump will be held accountable by the people. But we don't shatter the country and openly allow criminal prosecutions against your political opponent to serve the country.
He's not riding his brakes.
So we get that. The people are the ultimate check.
You got my flash.
Now, there exists and can exist no power to control that discretion. Being entrusted to the executive, the decision of the executive is conclusive. A subordinate officer is to conform precisely to the will of the president. And the acts of such
we almost had a fire at the house last night.
Examinable by the courts.
The fur baby's water dish, which is a big gravity dish. It's like a 2.5 gallon gravity dish. I guess emptied out, and they
Jack Smith doesn't like it. Thus, the official
drug it over in front of the little portable heater that we have in the
can never be
living room and melted it.
Because the executive power is vested with him by the Constitution.
Almost right up against it.
Justice Marshall emphasized that point in March.
Yeah, scary as hell.
Nothing can be more perfectly clear.
I told the wife that that thing's not going to be left on anymore at night, unless it gets super cold, like below zero.
The president is like the root.
Yeah, she had to get up early, so she caught it this morning.
The origin source of total power.
Like melted the bottle itself that goes on top of it.
Requires it to function that way. Otherwise, somebody else is more powerful than the president.
So in fact, she's probably stopping at Walmart on the way home today to get a new one.
So we can't do that. It's by design. That's why it's an important power position. Likewise, Justice Story also wrote about this. He said the president in his official acts is accountable only to his country and to his own conscience. His decision in relation to these powers is subject to no control, and his discretion when exercised is conclusive. Discretion. I mean, this is all official duty stuff. Right? Nobody's saying he can just like start nuking cities or something. So it says he reinforces this point. It is no answer that such a power may be abused. This is what they said. Oh my gosh, well, if that's true, then the president can abuse his power. Okay, that's true, writes the smart judge, Justice Story. He says, yeah, there is no power which is not susceptible to abuse. And this is where demented Jack Smith went a little bit extra demented for our life. He was saying Trump could just execute like half of Congress. Okay, maybe in your deluded state. But that's, yes, everything can go, you can do everything, you can go on every string until it's. But that doesn't mean you just get to prosecute anybody on a whim because your side hates the other person. Now, the remedy for this, writes Justice Story, is to be found in the Constitution itself. It explains clearly, he writes, impeachment and Senate.
Hey, Gregory.
Very easy. Somebody can, if there really is a big
Sorry, I missed your stream earlier today, man. I was super busy at work. I noticed it.
Pretty quick with Trump.
Yeah, you had one.
Justice Story rejected the notion that the legality of the orders of the president.
I didn't even stream from work today. I was so busy.
Findings of facts upon the proof submitted to a jury, right? Yeah. So the president. I don't know if this was a good decision or not. Let's take it to court. And then
I got quite a few. Supposedly, supposed to have a few new people today, so we may have some cool shit.
No, we don't run the country via criminal jury or Jack Smith. So they continued. They say, look, we're going to support this. Accordingly, we've got Mississippi versus Johnson. That says the courts may not issue an indictment against the president's official acts. The separation of powers says accordingly. And the government cites this case, but that case is inapplicable. Not even on point. The government also cites the president's amenability to criminal subpoenas as evidence. Okay, they want this. They're saying, okay, look, the president can respond to criminal subpoenas for evidence. Evidence. But Fitzgerald distinguished that. A criminal prosecution is far more intrusive because it exposes the president to liability himself. And if you want more evidence of this from our founding days, there was a convention when James Madison was there. And these were made in support of a motion to make the president impeachable for offenses in office. Impeachment, okay, from Madison, not criminal prosecution. Says James Madison, many people say he's the father of the Constitution, kind of thinker and crafter of it, provides a principal check against the alleged presidential malfeasance. There it is, very clear. Impeachment, not criminal prosecution. Now, contrary to Jack Smith, the threat of future prosecution with its more severe stigma and penalties is even far more menacing than a civil lawsuit. The government says the president already faces this concern, but on the contrary, impeachment and conviction. Yeah, so here Jack says, the impeachment judgment clause authorizes prosecution after impeachment and Senate conviction. We got, well, now, on the contrary, they say, no, on impeachment and conviction, it requires a broad consensus of senators and representatives across the country. It provides a powerful structural check against politically motivated prosecutions, which I couldn't agree more. If Trump had done something actually bad, and he was actually guilty of this, of anything, or any president was, then both parties would say, okay, like that's enough. In American history, and you take a look at, for example, George Santos. Maybe that's a good recent example. In American history, now, you know what's not a good example of that is Menendez, who also looks like maybe he's going through the process. Everybody's innocent until proven guilty. But, we'll see. We'll see what happens to him. We'll see what the Democrats do with him. Of course, they cover for their own. But in American history, 3 presidents have been impeached and none convicted. None. Stripping away this check would radically diminish the president's independence, and people would come up with newfangled and artificial treasons by which violent factions would wreak havoc and turn their malignity upon another. Written by James Madison, Federalist 47. So they say the government is now citing OLC memos and other things. And they argue that the prospect of future criminal prosecution for knowingly criminal acts can have a salutary, not a chilling effect. Now they rely on the presumption. They say, ironically, the government relies on the presumption of prosecutorial regularity. But the prosecution of a president is necessarily and unavoidably political. So you can't just say it's like a regular criminal prosecution. Even the OLC is saying, if you're going to prosecute a president, it's going to be political, obviously, because we're not idiots. Like Chuckin comes in and says, I don't want to talk about the election. I don't care about politics. You're going to treat them like every other J6er. And those weren't political either. Of course, we illegal. So they say, Jack Smith says that Article 3 courts, and we read this and we laughed about this yesterday, hysterical. He says, if a president is being unlawfully prosecuted, Article 3 courts can just fix it. Like they won't let politicized prosecutions come through. Oh gosh. Hey Jack, have you been to DC? You made the mathematical arguments. What's the conviction rate for J6ers versus the DC local crime contingent? What's the difference? Both happen in Washington DC. Is it 99% for J6ers get convicted? But what's the percentage of convictions for charges based on all the other crimes? Put them all together. DUIs, put them on domestic violences, drug crimes, pick them. What's the breakdown? Obviously, it's biased and partisan, and the courts are rubber stamping it. They love it. Right? They go to cocktail parties, and we saw Judge Barrel was up there with Lisa Monaco doing whatever they were doing up there. Anyways, they say that the courts can just fix this. Well, that logic is circular. Saying under the separation of powers, Article 3 courts cannot sit in judgment of the president's official acts, and the government cannot cure the unconstitutionality of that by invoking the aspect that is the most offensive of the separation of powers. That's the point, is you don't get to do that. And so Jack Smith, we can just solve that by just putting the courts in charge. Hello? That's the whole problem, is you're trying to subordinate the president's official acts under some other entity, which violates the whole concept of separation of powers. So they say the government emphasizes the public interest in the federal criminal prosecutions. We have people who are saying, we need a speedy outcome on this because justice delayed is justice denied. And that this needs to get done now. And of course we know that the urgency here and really the framing of that is often for the defense, right? You think about throwing somebody in custody for 5 years without prosecuting them. Their justice is being delayed. That's on behalf of generally the defendant. And the right to a speedy trial is often exercised on behalf of the defendant. We don't want the court to delay. But my point is, they're absolutely accelerating Trump's prosecution. They want to get him done in like 9 months with 14 million pages of discovery. And they say it's because of the people. Like, we need an outcome on this. Well, for the election, right? That's the point. So, but again, the government overlooks the great deterrence and the disruption to the president's functions from the threat of these prosecutions. And if you are now alleging that the president can be prosecuted for his official acts, it outweighs the government's interests here. The government says that criminal immunity would contradict the rule of law and that the president would be above the law, which is a dumb phrase because the president is. That's why they can pardon people. They say, no, I don't like that law. No thanks. But in this case, the Supreme Court explained that immunity does not entail that the official is above the law, whereas here, absolute immunity is essential for the conduct of the public business.
Yeah. As I said, I'll probably
mandates immunity here, which is the most fundamental law.
I'll probably stream from there. I got about seven new people coming in, so.
And it would expose the nation to
since I wasn't able to stream from the office.
No, sorry, Jack.
I'll probably stream from the plant
allowing
tonight.
A single prosecutor like you, who's illegally appointed, to sit in judgment over a president's official acts, that poses dangerous risks. The U.S. Senate, not the special counsel, has the constitutional authority and the political accountability and the institutional competence to determine whether the public interest justifies prosecuting a president for official acts. Not Jack Smith. He's not elected for anything.
Oh yeah, they're back They were closed. The plant was closed down last week, but look at this. The semi has his lights off.
Joe Biden. So stop with the urgency for the public's interest. The Congress is structurally designed to consider and reflect the interest of the nation. That's the public interest. If there was enough constituency out there barking at the senators, convict Trump, they would have done it. That would have been the interest of the nation. But guess what? They didn't. There wasn't enough of that. Half the country, or maybe not half the country, but a good portion of it said that there's not enough there. And so there was not enough, the 2/3 requirement to actually convict him in the Senate. And so they failed. That is representation, all right? Not Jack Smith, who gets appointed by Merrick Garland. Now, as for the government's parade of hypotheticals that we read through and laughed at yesterday and at the prior, in Jack Smith's reply, that Trump is going to execute Congress, like literally, that's his argument. The memo
I'll cover other people's coverage of it, but it's not the actual list that's coming out. It's some of them will be from the list, but what's coming out is actually just the results of a civil suit against Ghislaine Maxwell. They had, and then the press had to sue to even have that released.
Now the government's concerned.
So some of the names are just going to be, aren't going to be necessarily people that were clients.
It takes a long time. It might prevent the prosecution of a president in some margin.
Of course, they'll redact all the victims and stuff, but
these are called structural checks. That's why we have a trial before we lock someone up.
Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous.
Because you're very angry at Donald Trump.
I have no problem with them redacting the victims' names, but yeah, I mean,
but they ensure
we're pretty sure we know most of the names on it, or at least some of the names on the list.
Impeachment and a conviction before some demented prosecutor who doesn't.
Bill Clinton for sure.
Decides they're going to try to deviate the entire course of the election. No thanks. We want it to slow.
But it's going to be nice to actually see it on paper.
Now here they say, also constitutional text supports the presidential immunity.
Did you hear Aaron Rodgers yesterday? So yeah, Jimmy Kimmel's probably pretty scared.
But the Supreme Court recognized there is absolute immunity and qualified immunity for other executive branch officials, neither of which are in the Constitution. So that's interesting. If the Constitution doesn't expressly provide for it, so what? The Supreme Court found it.
She did not work at Mar-a-Lago.
There's a bunch of stuff that's not in the Constitution that they found in there. A lot of it, unfortunately, they found it, like Commerce Clause powers and so on.
No, I don't think she worked at Mar-a-Lago. In fact, this was before the second arrest of Epstein. After the first arrest of what was happening down there,
it does explicitly.
Trump banned him from Mar-a-Lago.
Read the
Epstein
judgment clause, Jack.
Yeah, no, Trump banned Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell from Mar-a-Lago after the first time it came out, and it was swept under the rug.
Now, next, Jack Smith notes that impeachment applies only to high crimes and misdemeanors. Okay, but high crimes and misdemeanors encompasses official acts of the president that the Senate deems sufficiently serious to warrant removal. Things that are of a nature which may be peculiar.
But it'll be interesting. You never know who may pop up on there.
Be denominated politically. Okay, so this is.
But I don't think it's all about the clients.
They say.
So we'll see.
Thus,
I'm not holding my breath. I mean, the whole list should be. I mean, she was convicted. The list is in the conviction. There's a reason why that should be hidden. I don't care whose side. I don't care if Trump's on there or not. I don't care who's on there. That should be public record. She's doing time because of what she did with these people. Who are these people?
He made this point multiple times, right? So this is another argument. They say, Jack Smith says, well, the president...
All right, guys, I'm going to let you go. Like I said, I'm going to do my best to try and stream tonight. All right. I hope not to disappoint. Love you guys. Thanks for riding with me. I'll be back later. Peace.
Tried, convicted. If he is convicted of treason, bribery, or